Hey, I'm just going to go through the various tools here in Flash and explain their functions. And I'm probably going to mess up a lot because I don't have a script, and I normally have a script. So here goes. Before I actually mention the workings of the tools here, though, I should mention the difference between a vector image, which is what Flash natively uses, and a raster image, which is what pretty much everything that's not Flash uses. This is a raster image, and as you zoom in on a raster image, you'll notice it gets pretty ugly. That's because you can see every single pixel here, because it saves the position and color of every pixel, which also creates a fairly large file size, and it doesn't work very well for two-dimensional animation. Flash, on the other hand, uses these vectors here, and if you zoom in on a vector, there's absolutely no point where it becomes pixelated. That's because it's rendered mathematically. Although you can't actually see the math and you draw normally, that's how it works, and the most useful thing about it is that you can edit your images after drawing them, like this. I'll explain how to do this later, unless of course you figured it out from this obvious example. Okay, so I'll start out with the easiest two tools, the circle square, the circle tool, and the square tool. If you click and drag with the circle or square tool, you will create a circle or a square type shape. If you hold down the shift key, you can create a perfect circle or a perfect square. You can also hold down the mouse over the square tool to create a polystar, and I really have no idea why you want to create a polystar. When you select the pencil tool, you'll notice there are three possible line types at the bottom: straighten, smooth, and ink. For most instances, you'll want to use smooth. With smooth selected, Flash will attempt to smooth out your lines somewhat. With straighten selected, Flash will attempt to make your lines more jagged, which is mostly noticeable if you're trying to make actual jagged lines. The final option, ink, seems to exclusively exist if you want tiny little ugly squiggly horrible lines. Okay, so here you have some lines, a fill, and a fill with an outline. I'll try to explain the difference between lines and fills while I explain these selection tools up here. If you click the lesser used selection tool, the white one, which is a sub-selection tool, and then you click and drag over an object, you'll notice you can see the points. That's because a simple shape like this has exactly 4 points, because as I said, Flash only memorizes things mathematically, so it's only actually remembered these 4 points in the corners. For something like a curve, if you select this object, you'll notice that there are still 2 points here, and then there are these 2 little handles with circles on the edge. That's because Flash remembers these 2 points, and it also remembers the calculation for the curve, which is based on these little handles you can pull and drag at if you have the white sub-selection tool selected. Normally you won't actually use this tool, so it doesn't really matter if you don't understand this right now, but this is just to understand how Flash actually saves your documents. All you have are these points and the little handles. If you go to the black selection tool, which you'll use much more often, you can still select things like these points and drag them around. If you move your mouse to the corner of a point, you'll see a little right angled curve, or if you move it near a curve itself or in between 2 points, you'll see a little curvy curve. If you drag while it's in between 2 points, you'll still be adjusting the point, although without all the complicated dots and lines, etc. If you move it near a corner, you'll be moving the actual point around instead of actually adjusting where the curve is. The same goes for fills here. An easy way to think of the difference between a line and a fill is that the line is like the outline to an object, whereas the fill is the object itself. Lines can also be used to separate objects, like so, and you notice if you click part of the object with the selection tool, you'll only select part of it. If you delete this line, it is now one whole object again. This can be used for various drawing styles. For example, draw a line here, curve it, maybe give this a different color, and get rid of this. Let's just pretend this is a proper shading and it doesn't look horrible. Another thing to note is that either in games or movies, lines take up a lot more of the user's processing speed. So if you have lines such as this, like moving around, turning dynamically and so forth, it will bring your animation to a crawl. It might go at 1 frame per second. Let's just say you want a little character in your screen called Little Fuzzball, and it's simply composed of thousands upon thousands of lines. We give some little eyes here. If you have this object moving around and turning and so forth, or you have a lot of them, and your user has a slow computer, it will not look pretty slow and horrible. So I do not recommend using lines, or at least not using a lot of lines, especially in games. Okay, so I'm going to group this random object now to serve as an example. I'm going to make it a symbol. You'll notice the eyedropper tool can pick up colors from either fills or lines, but not from grouped objects or symbols. If you want to pick up colors from a grouped object or a symbol, simply press one of these little buttons here for the color, and notice you automatically get an eyedropper. The difference being you can pick up colors from anywhere here, including your screen, and of course grouped objects. The only kind of annoying thing about this is that if you move your pointer just between 2 different objects, you'll notice it gives you a kind of weird in-between greenish red color. because it's just trying to calculate which color you're picking up. So this is not quite as precise if you're trying to pick up really tiny colors in a corner somewhere. And it can even accidentally pick up colors from your screen here. The paint bucket tool here fills in any filled in area with your fill color, or whatever your selected fill color is. You'll notice that it does not fill in areas with even the tiniest gap in them. You can change this in the corner here, as you can change the gap size to, for example, close medium gaps, and that'll close in this gap. Not this one's a little too large, so you can change that a little larger, maybe close large gaps. And of course there is a limit to this. If you have a really gigantic gap like here, there is no size which will close this. You'll have to go to something like your selection tool and actually fix this gap. Now you'll notice we're applying solid colors everywhere, there's no gradients. You can select one of the horrible looking default gradients down here, and for example if I select this linear gradient, then you would click and drag with your paint bucket to select where it starts and stops. The problem with these default gradients is they look really horrible. You'll see this red one a lot in Flash on buttons, and I guess you recognize it here. You've probably seen it. It looks extremely horrible and noobish. It is just incredibly bright red, contrasting to incredible black. To make your own gradients, hopefully less horribly dramatic, press Shift plus F9 to open the color mixer. And up here you notice it says the gradient type is radial. By default it normally says solid color. You can change to either a linear or radial gradient. If you have, for example, linear selected, you can change each of the colors here. You can drag these around to change how fast it changes, or if you click in between, you can create your own colors. And whichever one of these you have selected, you can change in this little window here which type of color it is. This is pretty horrible gradient I'm making right here, but you get the idea. And of course, while it's selected, you can still click and drag to put your gradients down. If you made too many of these, which is incredibly easy to do, you can click and drag them off. You just click and drag and you get rid of them, if you do it properly. And there we have a completely horrible gradient. Oh yeah, and if you want to actually directly select colors for these, as you'll often want to do, because simply selecting here, these colors aren't often enough. You'll often want something from your screen. Something which you might not notice is if you double click on one of these here, you'll get your eyedropper again, and then you can use this bigger window to get better colors than this little thing here. Or of course you can simply double click and steal something directly from your stage or from your window or whatever you want. Okay, so moving on, this little thing next to the paint bucket called the ink bottle will apply an outline to whatever you click. It's sort of like the opposite of the paint bucket. That's pretty straightforward. There are no options for this. Next up we have the line tool, which is more useful than it seems. It's actually, ironically enough, one of the best way to draw curves, as in conjunction with the selection tool at least. You can create pretty good curves with this. Just mess with that. You'll notice that with the new version of Flash, there's a little option in the corner here for object drawing mode. This is for people that are used to Illustrator, I guess, but it kind of messes things up. If you notice that every time you're drawing something, it does an annoying blue square around it, and then you're no longer able to edit it, that's because you must have this little option in the corner here accidentally selected. It basically groups every new object you draw or every line you draw, which can be extremely annoying. So I recommend keeping that off. And if you accidentally grouped something, press Ctrl B to break it apart into separate objects again.